Hello Alive. Welcome again to our Bible studies. In our last session, Jonas helped us to look at the first part of Love Resurrected. In fact, in the last two sessions, he unpacked beautifully and tenderly the death of Jesus upon the cross and the unassailable factuality of the resurrection. Two truths that we build our lives upon. And my task today is to look at some in-between things. Humanly speaking, the death of Jesus was looked upon as a failure. At least that's how it seemed in the eyes of the disciples. Two of them, returning to Emmaus, complained to the man who joined them in their walk home, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days? We had hoped." What words? We had hoped that he was going to be the one who would bring us deliverance from our oppressors. They certainly only had a human point of view of who Jesus was. But divinely speaking, however, there was a wisdom in the death and resurrection of Christ that was of a far higher level than known before. Paul wrote later to the Corinthian believers of a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of the age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. N.T. Wright wrote, in other words, the powers that put Jesus on the cross didn't realize that by doing so, they were in fact serving God's purposes, unveiling the wisdom that lies at the heart of the university. I love the story in C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, when after Aslan had been slain by the Ice Queen and was resurrected, he whispered into Lucy's ears there was a magic, a deeper magic, that she did not know about. And it was manifested in resurrection and life. So, in heaven's eyes, what was the cross all about? Number one, it was a throne. It was the throne upon which Christ pronounced judgment on Satan and all his hordes. Satan thought he was destroying Christ when in fact Satan put Christ on the throne. I just recently read a story, and I need to look at it some more, where somewhere in America a young lamb was bitten in the face by a snake, a rattlesnake, very poisonous snake. And the shepherd was watching this lamb. Its face swelled up, its body swelled up, but after a couple of days, it recovered. And then he made the point that the antidote for snake bites is primarily made up of lamb's blood, because the lamb's blood has properties in it that fight against snake venom. And so this was the punchline. The blood of the lamb destroyed the venom of the serpent. That's a great line to think about. It was a throne. Secondly, it was a weapon. It was, as N.T. Wright saw, the weapon that God used to strip the armor from the rulers and authorities as soldiers would do with beaten enemies. Paul wrote to the Colossians, he cancelled the record of the charges against us and took it away by nailing it to the cross. In this way, he disarmed the spiritual rulers and authorities. He shamed them publicly by his victory over them on the cross. The cross was a throne. The cross was a weapon. The cross was, if you like, a new holy mountain. Listen to N.T. Wright again. This is great. The greatest religion the world has ever known and the finest system of justice the world has ever known came together to put Jesus on the cross. The misunderstanding, betrayal and denial of close friends added another dimension. The mocking of the soldiers and the crowds deepens both the agony and the irony. Finally, the nation's rage, as Psalm 2 said they would, rising up against the Lord and his anointed, and God's response is this: I have set my king, my son, upon my holy hill. No longer Zion, the ancient temple mountain, but Golgotha, the ugly little hill a bit to the west. Christ was dead. Let's talk about his burial. And his body remained hanging on the cross. The custom of the Romans was to leave them there for the birds. Jewish law, however, insisted on a same-day burial. And so at this point enters Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. Joseph was a rich merchant who had not consented to the condemning of Jesus. He was a secret disciple. John in his gospel adds that Nicodemus, a master of Israel, Jesus actually called him the teacher of Israel, came as well. He was a good man, not afraid to challenge the Sanhedrin. It took this crisis to bring their faith into the open. And it would cost them both to get involved with the burial of Christ. It was a yearly Passover, and they would in fact contaminate themselves by touching a corpse. It would be interpreted that they thought the body of the Lamb of God was more important than the Passover lamb. And there would be rejection by their contemporaries and maybe by family members. Feelings will be running high. He was placed in a tomb. It was a new one, possibly preventing contamination. It was a borrowed one. Even in death he owned nothing. It was a guarded one. The Jewish leaders were fearful of an attempt by the disciples to deceive the people. Maybe they feared that the resurrection might actually happen. It's ironic that the Jews had to break the Sabbath in order to secure the guard and the seal on the tomb. And then there's a bit here where he descended into hell and Hades. The Apostle Peter wrote, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water." This is a disputed area. The phrase descended into hell is not actually found in the Bible. This doctrine came into existence about 390 AD. Wayne Grudem states that the phrase "he descended into hell" was not found in any of the early versions of the Creed, used by Rome, Italy, and Africa, until it appeared in one of 2 versions from someone called Rufinus in AD 390, nearly 400 years after the death and resurrection of Christ. It was then included only after AD 650. It seems that Rufinus himself took it to mean he descended into the grave. Calvin felt that it meant it was expedient at the same time for him to undergo the severity of God's vengeance to appease his wrath and satisfy his just judgment. Thinking about the passage in 1 Peter 3 that we read, we have to ask the question, why the seemingly limited antediluvian audience? Why the people before the flood? On the other hand, we need to look at Hebrews 11:13, which says, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged they were strangers and exiles on the earth. We need to ask ourselves, is this the group that Christ preached to? Did he release the faithful who were waiting? He would have had to experience the separating of the soul from the body. That is what death is about. Did he display this triumph to the hosts of Satan, proclaiming that he now had the keys to death and Hades? Most certainly we can say that Christ, through his death, broke the power of death. The writer to the Hebrews says, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. Because he has died, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Because, listen to this, because he died, the grave is now sanctified and no longer holds any fear. Death is not the end. A friend of mine who's a headmaster of a junior school, infant school, tells the story of a group of children in a classroom where, working away, it was a very warm day, the windows were open, and suddenly a wasp flew in. And all panic broke out in the classroom. Children dived under the chairs, and people found book to swat it with, and eventually it was dealt with and some kind of normality returned to the class. The following day, same kind of weather, window open, nice and warm, a blue bottle flew in and nobody flinched. Everyone got on with stuff. And my friend thought about that and he said, what's the difference? He said, it's the sting. There was no sting in the blue bottle. The sting was not there. And listen to me. We will, if Christ has not come by the time we die, we will die, but the sting has been removed. There is no fear. The grave, for us as believers, is simply a doorway into heaven. Bear with me with a little bit of poetry, and then an imaginative glimpse through the eyes of someone called Robert Harrison, an Anglican vicar who gives himself every Monday to writing. The 4th century poet William Langland wrote a piece called Piers, the Ploughman, in which Piers falls asleep and dreams of Christ throwing open the gates of hell and proclaiming to Satan, here is my soul as a ransom for all these sinful souls, to redeem those who are worthy. They are mine. They came from me, and therefore I have the better claim on them. You, by falsehood and crime and against all justice, took away what was mine. In my own domain, I, in fairness, recover them by paying the ransom and by no other means. What you got by guile has been won back by grace. And as a tree caused Adam and all mankind to die, so my gallows tree shall bring them back to life. Robert Harrison imagines that weekend through the eyes of an archangel called Orion. Great books. He's got a series of 3. He wrote this: Lucifer anticipated that the end was near. He picked a group of close supporters and assembled them at the foot of Jesus' cross. And the host of heaven looked on in paralyzed fear. We were told not to get involved or to intervene. And Jesus began to gather breath, building up his strength for one last cry. He raised his head, looking beyond his enemies, beyond his mother and his closest human friend, beyond the millions of angels who longed to save him. He looked into the emptiness beyond and shouted as loud as he was able, my Father, I leave my spirit in your hands. That was his last breath. The light of his life went out and his defeated spirit slid from its body. Lucifer was there to catch it, but there was no triumphant shout from the opposition. I imagine that they too were overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. Lucifer held tight to his prize. His followers closed around their leader as he carried his limp quarry away. They passed in front of Michael and myself and stopped, whereas all human spirits are bound by the ties of their myriad selfish activities. The Son was ensnared in every crime and callousness that has ever been known in humanity's sorry history. He had been weighed in my boss's scales, God's, and been found wanting. He'd taken on the sin of the whole world. Lucifer said nothing. He simply looked at me. There was no smile on his face, no mockery in his eyes. It was almost as though he was waiting for my permission to continue. I stared back, too numb to respond, as the leader of the opposition carried my master away to the place where he stores all the human dead to death. And the whole company of rebel spirits followed. Early next morning, a very dejected archangel left heaven again and sat by the tomb. There were the Roman guards sealed on the tomb. And suddenly there's a voice from inside the tomb. Uriel, is that you? He's startled. Yes, recognizes it's his master, Jesus. And Jesus says, move the stone, will you? It's getting pretty stuffy in here and we need to get out. But what about the soldiers? Uriel, you're an archangel. You can deal with soldiers. Wave of the hand. They're all like dead men. Uriel moves the stone. Jesus comes out grinning from ear to ear and then steps aside and then ushers out Adam, Eve, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, Elijah, Elisha, Moses, David, and the list went on, and they all left with him into heaven. Fabulous. I love the way you can use imagination to paint a picture. Some strange events happened. There was the darkness over the cross. It was from noon until about 3 in the afternoon. There's historical evidence for this outside the Bible. Phlegon, a free man of the Emperor Hadrian, is quoted by Eusebius as writing, in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, there was a great darkness over Europe, surpassing anything that had ever been seen. And that year was the year of Christ's death. Tertullian found in the records of Rome a reference to a worldwide darkness which the statesman could not explain. Do you know, when you cook bread, you need an extremely hot oven and you need to shut the door on it. And when the heat was on the bread of life, God shut the door. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you.